Today, we are talking about 5 of my takeaways from watching a bunch of Black men, specifically divorce stories. I am Dr. Shareece. I help Black men and women heal from trauma and toxic relationships. And one of the first things I noticed in watching these men talk is their unresolved trauma. Oh my God. So having trauma doesn't it doesn't make you a bad person or anything like that. It just means there are some things that happened in your life that were traumatic to you and that you haven't dealt with. And most people experience some kind of traumatic event in their life at some point. When it happens in childhood, it has a tendency to stick with us in a way that can make us less resilient to difficulties in life. But it also makes us susceptible to trauma bonding. And what so many of these men did was not deal with their trauma before they got married. And I do view marriage as an opportunity for people to deal with their trauma. You have a mirror in your wife and you get to see all of your triggers and all of your flaws and all of the things that you need to improve upon. And so if people are up to the task, they can improve upon these things in a marriage. But for a lot of people, they often don't, and it leads to the demise of their marriage. There are so many ways to deal with trauma, but as a psychologist, I recommend like a specific framework of helping to address, acknowledge, heal from trauma. But you can find healing in spirituality or religiosity. You can find healing in a self-help book or a coach. What's most important in this process is acknowledging what happened to you, telling someone the story, like looking eye to eye at a person, telling them the story and having them validate your experience. And then if you need to confront anyone or you need to practice active healing, increase your self-esteem or something like that, you can do those steps too. But you have to talk about what happened to you and then you have to let it go. That is one of the biggest things that stood out in a lot of these videos, the unresolved trauma, and then men not feeling like they had a safe space to tell their story. The second takeaway that I have kind of feels like two in one. So I noticed that a number of the men were cheated on, right? They didn't divorce their woman. Very rarely do men divorce a woman. They are more likely to be forgiving to that woman. But, right, so I view cheating as a symptom of a greater problem. And I don't want to call the greater problem money, but, right? So one of the takeaways, because it ends up being like a thread that unravels to get to the root. If a man has not found his purpose, passion, and I try not to, like, you don't need to have a big purpose. Like, you don't need to have the next, like, $1 billion idea necessarily, but there needs to be something that fuels you in life. Like, there's a reason you were born. I think we're supposed to have fun. And whatever it is that you can find that you really enjoy, that's your purpose, right? If you just want to be a surfer in Costa Rica, like, do that. Find whatever it is that brings you joy, and then money will follow. So on the outside looking in, these stories about cheating often sounded like he didn't have money. He didn't have money. He didn't have money. She was working. She was doing all these things. And then you also, just if you have a understanding about how heterosexual marriages typically go, there's a lot of responsibility on the woman to do the household things. And because we live in capitalism, it's very difficult for a one-income household to carry all the financial responsibilities if you're looking at what average people make. So if you have a woman who is making average, her husband is making average, but she's also doing all of the household work. She's trying to get him to be more of a partner at home or with the kids or something like that. And then if his income dips or if he loses his job and then he's also miserable to be around, I'm just thinking all of these things kind of intertwine, or he has really no purpose, or he just does odd jobs, or he had one standard of living for her before, but now it's dropped and it hasn't really picked back up, or then he gets depressed. Like, there's so many things that can fuel this, like, not having money. But if you know what it is you're supposed to be doing in life, I think you have a clearer head on how to deal with life, or the kind of people you need in your life, not just romantically, but also like in friendships and also in work, that you can, even with the challenge, if you lose your job, right? If you're furloughed or laid off or fired or whatever it is, that you have a plan because you have a passion or a purpose that you fully understand. You know which way to go. And so it's not going to take 5 years for you to find another form of employment. And then that woman cheats on you because you don't have any money. You're also not really contributing at home. And she's looking for the thing that she found in you at one point in time, but it's not really there. That was a long one, right? But I think it speaks to how complex humans are and how difficult marriage. I'm not married, right? I'm just learning about marriage. But speaks to, as I understand, married people talk about, what marriage really is, and then also listening to divorced people talk about like what led to the end of the marriage. There are so many pieces in it that if you don't nurture all of them, y'all are gonna be disconnected. Money is a big part of marriage. My number three takeaway from listening to men talk about their divorce is there are different types of women, and they didn't seem to be exposed to the different types of women. And so they picked a woman whose red flags they ignored or thought were going to change once they got married. This is not often the story we hear on social media where, there are the gender wars happening. And I'm hoping in 2025 there are less gender wars, but, online is just a crazy place. You would think everybody's rich and, married to a millionaire or whatever. This video is sponsored by me. Check out my website, spiritsoulsense.com, for a couple of free downloads. I also have my poetry ebook for sale, and you can also purchase my artwork and merch to help support my channel. But there are so many men who are emotionally open, who are sensitive, like a highly sensitive person, right? Men are highly sensitive people too, and grew up in whatever kind of household they grew up in, and kind of have this naivety about women and how some of them are, right? I think it's part of why the red pill, manosphere was invented to understand women better. They then go off on a whole tangent of blaming women. But if you just understand the nature of a woman, I think that would be very helpful for men. But for men who just, I don't know, you think all men are like your mom who loves you. She loves you because you're her son. She's not just treating all boys and men the way she treats you. Maybe she has a respect and love for men in general, but she's not going out of her way for other men in the same way that she would for you. And therefore, all women are not going out of their way to love and be kind to men. So I think it's super important that red flags are not ignored. People really don't change much. Like whatever their flaw is probably something they'll be working on throughout their lifetime. They may get a really good handle on it, but in general, most people don't change much. And so if she's disrespectful, if she doesn't appreciate you in the early, right, we're talking 3 months, first year or two of the relationship, it is highly unlikely that any of that is going to change. If she is talking to you crazy and is not apologetic about it, or, it happens on such a cycle or on repeat or something like that, like there are such different women out here, right? There are women who just want men for their money, right? They have their own, and I have a bunch of videos on women and their own trauma and how to heal from their trauma, but it's not your job to save anybody. It's not your job to heal anybody. You can't do it. It doesn't work like that. And so if you see a wounded soul, like you can wish them well, but you don't invite them into your home and as a long-term person in your life if what they mostly bring is chaos and harm. Those are the women, you have a conversation or two, a date or two, a little fling or two with, but you don't impregnate them, and you definitely don't marry them. I'm not speaking negatively on women in general, but I do think it's helpful to acknowledge that there are different types of women, and not every woman is a wife. And that could be okay. You could have this experience or have this interaction or avoid it altogether, but you cannot just marry any woman, right? Not to call women hoes, but there are some women who are, you cannot make them into a housewife. It just doesn't work that way. Okay. My number 4 takeaway is that it's important to be emotionally mature so that you can have good conflict resolution in a marriage. It sounded so much like men shut down whenever there was a conflict. They didn't really want to deal with it. They swept it under the rug. They really had a hard time holding their woman accountable, or like, I think it's very loving to call someone in. You're not, the goal is not to embarrass or make them feel bad or shame them or anything like that. But if a woman is doing something that you don't like, you don't appreciate, you have to say something about it. And I would not encourage you to wait until it's the 12th time that something has been done for you to then say something. After the first 1-2 times, you have to be able to communicate how you're feeling. I'm thinking about doing a book review. I probably said this in like 2 videos now. I have no idea how I would structure it, but I want to share the book Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, because if you are lacking in emotional maturity, emotional intelligence, you probably had a parent or both who were emotionally immature, and you need to learn how you can strengthen yourself, become more disciplined, express yourself in more healthy ways so that you can resolve conflict. Conflict is a part of life. We're not always going to see eye to eye. You are not going to agree on everything, and that is okay. What is most important here is how then do we deal with the conflict? You want to send the kids to private school. I want to send them to public school. How are we going to come together to negotiate what is actually going to happen? And if I don't like it or you don't like it, how are we still going to be kind and loving to one another, even though one of us had to sacrifice or compromise in this decision making? That is what happens over and over and over in marriage. You all are not going to always agree. How are you going to come to a solution? And it can't be one person always giving in. That will lead to resentment. And as the Gottman couples therapist expert will say, the 4 horsemen of, what is it, death, disaster, divorce will come for your marriage if you are not able to really negotiate what is going to happen with the shared life that you have. So many of these men really didn't speak up. They just really didn't share what was happening in their experience. And so they kind of just went along with whatever was going on, or spoke up a little too late, or had a woman that they ignored the red flags from who really didn't even care about his opinion or his perspective, which then led to the divorce ending. Mind you, most of these men were not the ones to initiate the divorce petition. They still wanted to be married. They were just hoping it got better, but just not having the tools to improve it. And I just want to point out that I do believe in couples therapy, but I don't think it's helpful as a long-term part. Yeah, like never ending. Like, I don't think it's helpful to be in couples therapy for 2 or 3 years. I think it's helpful to go in for tools on communication, tools on negotiation. Here's this one thing we're dealing with. I just have not heard a good story yet of, and I should probably look at the research, but I have not heard a good story yet of somebody who's been in couples therapy for years and their marriage was helped. It doesn't sound like the marriage is helped by this long-term couples therapy, but I definitely could be wrong on that. I don't have all the information. And my last one is, these men were not ready to be married, right? Is this your season of marriage? Are you supposed to be married now? And so there's 2 things. There's like the emotional readiness for a marriage. Do you want to cover your wife? Because I do really enjoy the biblical description of marriage. You want to die for her? Are you ready to do that? Are you ready to be the one responsible for a wife? Because it has a lot of responsibilities. Husband is a label that has a list of responsibilities under it. Wife is a label that has a list of responsibilities under it, which is why some people never get married. They just stay boyfriend and girlfriend or fiance forever, because then you don't have to have the list of responsibilities and you all could interact in a certain way and it'd be okay for that time. You'll see, right? There's some couples that have been together 10 years and then they get married. Well, one, he probably didn't really want to marry her, but second, after you put the label on, because you do this union in front of God, in front of the state, things change. I've heard this over and over again. Things change after you get married. After you start saying, this is my husband, this is my wife, things change. Expectations change. And that responsibility is often too great for some people who were not ready for it. I think the other part of the, are you ready? Is this really your season of marriage? Is being single is fun, okay? Being able to do what you want to do, not have to be accountable to anybody, is a really enjoyable experience. And if you never got the chance to be young, wild, and free, and you just happen to get in a relationship, quickly, and things progress so seriously, and you just never got a chance to experience certain things, oh my goodness. Which is why it's so often that you hear people who got married at 19, 22, 25, there's always infidelity in the relationship. Not always, but always. whether it's emotional cheating, financial cheating, physical, sexual cheating, pornography cheating. Like, there is often so much infidelity in those relationships where people get together so young, and for lots of different reasons, right? Because you're also not emotionally developed. Your frontal lobe is still developing. Your problem solving skills are still developing. There's less life experience to be lived, and so you're doing a whole bunch of new things at the same time. But like being 21 and single, come on now. That is a time. That is a time. But being 21 and married with 2 kids, that is a different time. And so because we have decades to live, I do encourage people to push back marriage. Like, we don't have to get married at 18. I was engaged at 18, but I also had a child. So it kind of made sense. But neither here nor there. I do encourage people, now that I'm 35, I do encourage people to consider delaying marriage, to have a little bit more life experience, to understand who you are, what your purpose, what your passion is, before you become one with somebody else. And then all of this like version of yourself is already gone. Like, you're like 20 and the you, like the just you, there's no more just you. If you have a husband or a wife, it's not just about you anymore. And I think it's imperative, I do think 28 is like the sweet spot for marriage. 26, 28, 32. Before that, oh my gosh, how many people do you know, right? Because I'm 35 now. So I can see my peers, the ones that got married before 25, most of them are divorced by 30. There's a reason for that. And it's not to say, I do want to acknowledge that there are lots of people who end up with their high school sweethearts, and they have, they go through what they go through, because every marriage will go through something. But all of those relationships that started with them so young, they really go through the ringer. But that was their life story to then become stronger and evolve as a human, and it fit for their life. I just want you to pause and ask yourself, is this my time? Is this what I really want right now? Do I really understand what I'm getting into? Because I do think there are some people who at 21, 22, enough life experience or enough wisdom, they know that this is the person they want to be with. They don't want to figure out anything else. I'm in love. This is it. And they really stick with that person and are faithful to that person and learn and grow with that person. I just don't think that's the norm, right? I think those are for particular types of people who have, much more, I don't know. I think they both have parents who have been together since high school. And so it makes sense that they would get with somebody from high school. Like, my parents are divorced. Your parents are probably divorced or were never married. And so maybe right out of high school, you're supposed to get married. I just think, ask yourself, just pause and ask yourself, do I really want to have a serious boyfriend for the entirety of college? Or would I consider sophomore year, right? Junior year, getting into this very serious relationship so that, I can have a fiance by the time I graduate. Just to think about it a little bit. Think about it a little bit. Ask yourself what you really want, what would be most beneficial to you, and if marriage really is what you want right now. Do you even understand what it is? Because there are so many people worshiping the idea of marriage, wanting the label of wife, but not the responsibility. That's my takeaway from the man them divorce. Okay. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you look in the description box, there are the links for all the videos that I watch. Not all, but the standout ones that I watch. But let me know your thoughts. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. And thank you for watching.